In this video, we're going to talk about Aemond Targaryen and what makes this character work. Let's get into it. The root of why people like this character so much is essentially because he's cool. He has an eye patch and he's really good at sword fighting. And he also has a really big dragon. But these things alone aren't really what makes him a cool character. For any character being appreciated this way, they have to have a reason to be cool. For example, if you're reading or watching a story and a dude with an eye patch and a sword randomly walks into a scene, you're probably going to think that he just looks goofy. We've all seen attempts at media trying to make cool characters and feeling badly when they're trying to throw in cool aspects about something without doing the legwork to properly set that up. Think about Euron for Game of Thrones. He has an eye patch and he's good with swords, but instead of a huge dragon, he has a massive fleet of ships that he by himself commands. This character should be extremely cool, but he's not at all. He's the goofy stereotype that we were talking about before. Of course, in A Song of Ice and Fire, it makes complete sense for Euron to have all of these things, but without the context, the show just plops him in as a side character without much backstory or the crucial character motivation that makes Euron good. But this isn't a Euron video. How this relates to Aemond is that the very aspect of his cool factor is explained and earned by his own merits. Yeah, he wears an eye patch, but he got it from taming the biggest dragon in the world. Yeah, he's really good at swords, but he practiced for years to get to that level. Yeah, he rides the biggest dragon, but he mustered up enough courage to ride it because of his siblings bullying him. Every positive trait Aemond has, he's had to work hard for, which puts him on a completely different playing field than someone like Aegon, for instance, which is almost nobody's favorite character in the show, even though he has more importance. Imagine if Aemond got no backstory and they just introduced him in episode 6 for the first time. You would think this dude is probably dumb looking, and when you see him beat Sir Christian, you would probably just roll your eyes. So I can't emphasize this part enough. Some more examples of this are Mary and Gary Stu-like characters, who could just do anything from the jump seemingly with no explanation or at the expense of the plot or story. Characters like these are boring because they have no stakes or humanity. The last part for this point that I want to bring up is that Aemond's still vulnerable, which he obviously should be. And I don't mean in an emotional sense, but for instance, he backs down to Daemon. So while Aemond's extremely skilled and strong, it shows that he's still smart, but most importantly that he looks up to people as well. Having a cool character like Aemond look up to someone else is extremely humanizing. Like, yeah, even a dude like this can have a role model. I mean, it's true, we all have someone we look up to. There's more evidence to this when Daemon cuts off Aemond's head. Aemond in this scene kind of looks like he's in awe, like Daemon's ruthlessness seems to be extremely impressive to Aemond. But more about the vulnerable side of this character. It's likely that Aegon abused Aemond in some other way than what we've seen on the show. For instance, when him and Sir Christian are looking for Aegon, they go to a brothel, and Aemond says that Aegon brought him there for his first sexual experience. And knowing Aegon's messed up thought process, we can only imagine the other things he put his brother through before Aemond started training. And this puts into context Aemond's underdog mentality. He's bullied by his siblings, even Jace, which is crazy because a lot of people considered him a bastard. Aemond was even born half the size of Aegon, so by all measures, he is an underdog, which seems to fuel his motivations. But this is a perfect moment to get into why he's a good villain for the show. So while the Greens aren't explicit antagonists, I guess, let's be honest, they're definitely framed as villains at the very least. Aemond fits this mold perfectly. I've said this before in other videos as well, but the best villains are the ones that are understandable. Don't get me wrong, there are villains that are straight up evil for evil's sakes, and they're fun. But more times than not, the good villains are the most understandable. Aemond fits snugly into this category. We can see his motivation for getting stronger and even wanting to bully other people since he is bullied himself. We may not agree with it, but you could definitely see where he's coming from. At first, Aemond is completely warranted in wanting to gain power, but he takes this way too far after he kills Luke. See, before this point, I don't think you can even consider Aemond to be a villain even though he's on side green. It makes perfect sense for him to defend his side of the house, and he was even a victim earlier. But as soon as he uses Vhagar to intimidate Luke, the dynamic obviously changes. These are the best villains, because at one point you agree with them, their logic and reasoning is justified and their actions match that. But at some point they take that logic too far and end up doing something bad because of it. This can be seen with Killmonger, Vader, Thanos. I'm not saying that Aemond is on par with these characters as villains, but the path the show takes to get him to that despicable point is the same. His logic is that he was bullied, so therefore he had to gain power and exert it. But he kept exerting his power even when everyone in the damn room knew how strong he was. He's obviously compensating. This would be like your friend going bald and then buying a sports car, but he never shuts up about it. And there's even more proof of this. In the dining room, seeing a pig get set down on the table for the meal. Luke looks at him and giggles, which is obviously referring to the pink dread joke of Aemond having a pig instead of a dragon. Aemond seems to genuinely get mad at this, at least to some capacity. But why would he care? He has the biggest dragon in the world, and he's the second most dangerous person in that room. So why does he care about a 6-year-old seal joke about him not having a dragon? It's obvious that he's still insecure and compensating for something, which is likely why he feels like he has to chase Luke at the end of the season. You also have to take into account that Aemond's logic is based off of bullying. Most people at some point have been bullied. This is different and more personal than other faults of logic we see in villains. I'm going to relate to bullying more than I relate to wanting to genocide half the universe for resource consumption. At that, I want to jump to the last section of the video, which is discussing why I think Aemond killing Luke is a great change for his character. The first point I'm going to get at is that this change fleshes out Aemond a lot. What I mean by that is it would be a lot less interesting and more boring if Aemond just wanted to kill Luke. It's more intriguing that he wanted to intimidate him and he just accidentally ends up killing him. Now don't get me wrong, it's still his fault for Luke's death. He was being extremely irresponsible, but it makes a lot more sense that it would happen this way. More tragic as well, since this intimidation was commonplace amongst the boys in their earlier years. Maybe not on this large of a scale, but still. I've seen people criticize the scene and say that it takes away the impact and or Aemond's autonomy when hunting down Luke, and I just don't agree. If this happened in the real world, this would be like manslaughter. Like, yeah, sure, you don't go drunk driving expecting to kill somebody, but making the decision of drunk driving is bad enough on its own. Yeah, Aemond doesn't know if Vhagar would act the way he did, but that doesn't really matter. Besides that, this scene is really good at showing one or two things. One being that Aemond actually cares about his nephew since his haunting look at the end of the season, which is interesting to me because he hasn't shown love for him throughout this whole show. Or two, he just simply cares about his reputation in this moment and or going against his mother. Remember that people will call him a kinslayer once they find out about this. Both of these options are interesting to me because Aemond doesn't really seem to care about either of them throughout the course of the show. He always walks around and acts like a cool guy, but for him to ultimately care about Luke or how other people perceive him is a new layer for his character that he just didn't have before. Also, once he gets it back to King's Landing, it can play out one of two ways. Either he can own up to the kinslayer name, or he could try to explain that it was an accident. Whichever option he chooses will tell us a lot about his character in further seasons. If he goes with the kinslayer name, we could see a Jaime-like route where he's extremely hurt that he lost his honor, but he's hiding behind a persona. And of course, the other route, him attempting to explain that was an accident, seems to indicate that he did care about Luke, or in some capacity, he at least knew that what he did was wrong. Either way could be pretty interesting, and I'd want to see what would happen for the setup in season 2. I hope you guys liked this breakdown, and I'll see you next week. See ya.